Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning into the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of APM Success. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Dan Orlovich. Dr. Orlovich is a pain management doctor currently in California. We're going to talk about some California-specific content today that may also apply in varying degrees in other states, but particularly for our California docs, you're going to want to pay close attention. Dr. Orlovich, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Justin. And just to add to that, if you're part of pain management, great. If your spouse is in pain management, great. But what we're going to cover today, even if you're not a pain management physician, may apply to you. And just like you said, Justin, even if you're outside of California, it may apply to you as well.
Excellent. So for starters, why don't you give us just a little bit of your background and what your current scope of practice looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So I finished my residency in 2020, finished my pain fellowship 2021. I spent 3 years with an orthopedic group in Southern California, and then in about July of 2024, I broke off and I split my time between doing my own pain practice, doing QME work, which I'm sure we'll get into later, and then some other valuable side projects that maintain my sanity and allow me to give back to the community.
Awesome. I'm excited to hear more about those. One of the things that we're always excited to do in the APM Success community is to help physicians chart a path towards autonomy professionally, and there's often a lot of financial considerations there. And what I understand about the QME facet of your professional existence is that, you said you started a practice last July, which is awesome. I would love to hear about that. But one of the things that is often necessary is some bridge income or a plan to make some money while you're getting things ramped up. Locums is really helpful for this. QME can be as well. So tell us about sort of that transition and the role that QME played for you.
Yeah, going way back, I think this interview is about 5 years in the making.
Yeah.
For the listeners who don't know, I think, Justin, you reached out back in 2020. I remember I was on vacation in Hawaii about wellness. Burnout was my big topic that I researched during residency, and QME, this side hustle, side income bridge opportunity, kind of fits in with that, and that's being in control of kind of your type of practice, what patients, what conditions you see, what kind of work-life balance you have. The beauty about QME, we'll get into it, but I think it's really neat. A lot of times, we go online and it's always like, hey, learn about profit and loss statements, learn about, real estate investing and these other endeavors that they're not passive, in my opinion. It takes a lot of time. Where with QME, we've spent the 4 years of med school, we spent 4 to 5 years in training. So it's like we've already acquired that knowledge. How do we kind of repurpose it, repackage it, and still find value in it? And that's where I think QME is really interesting and a really viable avenue for people.
Tell us a little bit about your professional journey and what in July 2024, when you decided to flip that switch, how are you processing the questions you were facing, and what made you decide to want to launch out on your own?
Yeah, what's the meaning of life, right? 2 parts. One part is I remember a very senior rep. She told me about, hey, just remember, 50% of graduating fellows will stay at their current position, 50% will leave. So always remember to kind of invest in yourself. My mentor during fellowship said, hey, even though pain management is a 1-year fellowship, the first 3, 5, 7 indefinite years, you have to invest in yourself. Really take time, carve out time to reflect on your practice, where you are with your family, the new modalities, things like that. Just don't fall into a rut. So I was very fortunate to join a group, treated very fairly in a very nice community. I really enjoyed treating those patients. What I found, though, is, I really like the ability to kind of exercise different avenues, different pursuits. And for some people, they might really like one pathway, and that's fine, no judgment. But for me, I found with time, Justin, I liked having a little bit more autonomy. I liked having a little bit more control over, I can work with this person, or I can go ahead and do outreach here. And that brings me a lot of joy. And I think that's, to me, kind of the American dream, where you have autonomy, you have freedom, and you can really practice medicine the way that deep down I think a lot of us want to practice.
Yeah, one of the things I've observed is that in these either an ortho group or multi-specialty group, because of uh, the different specialties that coexist, there tends to be some guardrails that may or may not fall in places that feel like the natural boundaries of your practice. And one of the benefits of doing your own thing, especially as pain management is a rapidly developing field, and
Oh,
with
yeah.
the new devices and treatment pathways that are coming online, seems like all the time. And I'm not a clinician, obviously, but I can observe when I go
Yeah.
to the conferences and I see the new clinical indications for the things that even already exist, and the way that the specialty itself is advancing. Pain doctors can do a lot, and in keeping up with the training and continuing to pursue these more advanced treatments, you have a lot of tools in the toolbox, and not a lot of or not every practice is going to let you use all those tools. So one of the benefits of doing what you're doing is you can pick the tool that you want that seems appropriate.
Yeah, you said it very diplomatically, and we all recognize there are some hurdles along the way, not dropping any names, of course, but there's some hurdles along the way, unfortunately, that kind of impair the physician's ability to deliver that care. I encourage anybody out there, if you have an avenue, like Justin said, I would recommend, if I could give any advice, kind of build those plans, reflect on it, and then make sure it's not a sudden decision, but kind of, Justin, I listened to your podcast. Build that kind of exit ramp. Be prepared financially, emotionally. You have mentors along the way. Things we know, but it's a gradual process, is what I'm trying to say.
So talk about, we can think about somebody who's launching a practice. Often the way it works is, even if you are busy on day one, it's going to take 60 days to get paid because of how revenue cycle works, assuming you're accepting insurance. So having a financial plan to be able to continue to pay your bills, not to mention like run the business itself, is really, really important. Talk about what is QME and how did that serve a strategic purpose for you in your practice launch?
Yeah, really quickly, disclaimer. In the state of California, I cannot advertise myself as a QME, meaning I can put, the QME designation behind my name, but I can't say, hey, this is how great I am, pick me. To answer your question about the QMEs, how I kind of got interested in it was when I went through training, two particular mentors, they're nerds, and I'm a nerd, right? We'd get a clinical question, or we'd go to M&M, or we would just be in the break room saying, hey, what kind of case are you in? What did you pick up? What technique are you hearing about? So we were always talking about cases, always saying, hey, what does the literature say? Right. And then when I got into practice, a lot of people were like, hey, your notes, you're like writing a novel. Just put 2 words in there. And I couldn't turn it off. Like, I really wanted to have a polished presentation in terms of the note. So I looked at my mentors, and they would always take a question and find the literature on it. I looked at kind of my tendencies, which was to try to figure out that answer in literature, try to explain it clearly, try to anticipate how someone might get confused when reading my note as well. That lends itself well in the medical legal space, and especially with QME, and we'll get into it, one has to be objective, and that's really important. I think when people talk about QME, Justin, they say, oh, it's work comp. Well, work comp is the treating aspect. That's your inbox messages. That's you need to send the request for authorization, you need to send your medications, and that's you need to, get your clinic slots. QME is totally different. I say QME is like, instead of being on the field, you're up in the box. And if you love the theory of medicine and the X's and O's of the game, you're not going to get sued because you're not treating. You're still able to provide value to the injured worker, patient, as well as the state of California. And you need to be objective. It's not like you're a hired gun where they say, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars and that's what you write. If you lean too far one way or the other way, Justin, you won't get picked for a panel. So being objective, being thorough is rewarded in the QME system.
What does QME stand for?
Qualified medical, it's either evaluator or examiner. I always have to Google it. Um, I should know this. but qualified medical evaluator or examiner there.
And tell us about sort of who is it that would employ the services of a QME?
Yeah, great question. So taking a step back, the state of California, the interpretation of the work comp law, it's liberal. Other states are more strict in that sense. Let's say someone gets injured, an injured worker gets injured. They say they can't go back. So there's a dispute between maybe the employer and the employee. That employee might go to what's called a primary treating physician, like in clinic, right? And there's still a dispute. So in the state of California, then most of the time, that employee gets an attorney to represent them, and the employer gets an attorney to represent them. They say, hey, employee, injured worker, where do you live? And they say, Los Angeles. So then they say, we're going to pick pain management in this zip code, and 3 random names show up if you're listed in Los Angeles. The applicant attorney crosses out one person, the defense attorney crosses out the other person, and then whoever is left will get that case. And then you're meant to settle a legal dispute. You have to play within the confines of the sandbox. We'll get into the kind of the negative part of QME, but that's the part that kind of tricks a lot of new QMEs.
And how do you become one of the physicians who's listed as a potential examiner?
Yeah, this is part of the downside. So there's a test in April, a test in October. You have to study for that test. Then you have to take a writing course because you can't write a regular clinic note. You have to use specific terms. You have to address specific common themes and patterns. So after you take this exam in April or October, I would say it takes about 8 to 12 months to start getting busy there.
And what kind of, if you're busy, what kind of volume may you potentially be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of times I get asked and people say, what's the best company to go with? And I say, well, what do you want? Meaning some people, they just want to stay where their clinics are, right? So they might get, depending on your specialty, depending where your clinics are, maybe a handful a month, right? And we'll get into the fee breakdown since this is a financial podcast there. Other times people say, hey, I want this to be more than a bridge, more than a side hustle. I really like this, or I want this to supplement more my income and kind of transition more out of clinical medicine. That might be, 30 a month, 30 cases a month. My math isn't good here, but, up to 50 cases depending on your specialty and depending where you're going. So it's totally up to you if you just want to add this a little bit every now and then, or you kind of want to rely on this.
And who pays you?
Excellent question. My understanding, I could be wrong here. My understanding is it's from, I have heard it described as there's a bucket of money. Workers' compensation employers pay into this money. I don't think employees pay into this money, but employers pay into this money, and then it's got to be distributed to all of California.
And so you're chosen, you're on this list of 3, Dr. A
Yep.
gets scratched, Dr. B gets scratched, and it's your lucky day, and you are the one. So when you're examining the patient, does that patient come to your clinic, or are you going to their house, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. So you get to list up to 10 clinics. And for people who, quote, want to be busier, there's data, and this is all public. That's why I love it. You can go to the Department of Workers' Compensation website, California website. You can see which areas, which zip codes have the highest demand. So you can stack the deck, if you will, if you list a clinic in a very high demand area, so you're busier. So let's say you get the clinic, you get chosen, and then you basically get a letter from the applicant attorney, if there is one. You get a letter from the defense attorney, and they might clue you in a little bit about the case. Hey, this is what we're arguing over. Sometimes it's generic. Then they send over all records, and so this is well before your visit, usually. The records, for most companies, are summarized. There's an index to help you kind of get through them. Then there's usually a historian who calls the injured worker, the patient, and asks questions. Then you show up on that date in your designated clinic. So one of the 10 locations listed on the state of California DWC website. You can Google or pull up my name on the DWC website and see my offices. You show up on that date. you have their records, you have the history, you review the records, you review the history with them. And then what makes it different from clinical medicine is, remember, it's a sandbox. So you really have to either pick up the patterns or answer the key questions throughout that exam.
What kind of patterns or questions are you looking for?
Great. So for example, let's just go back clinical medicine. You come in, Justin, with lumbar radiculopathy, sciatica. So I'd say, hey, Justin, your straight leg raise, your MRI shows a herniation. I'm going to order an epidural for you. My team will take care of it. That's clinical medicine, right? And I'm not knocking it. QME would say, Justin, what happened? Tell me, let's go through your job duties, right? How did this happen? Oh, I was lifting a 150-pound bag of concrete. Okay, I see that happens, how that can cause, a disc herniation. Justin, what kind of treatment have you had? Is this the best you're going to be? If this is the best you're going to be, then if you're impaired, I need to use a certain book to give you a percentage. If it's not the best you're going to be, I need to talk about TT, treatment and testing. Do I need to order an epidural? Do I need to order any MRIs for you? Things like that. And then finally, I need to say, did this happen? I don't want to use specific terms, but during work, right? Is this part of your job duty? Those are the key questions every QME has to answer. Did it happen at work? Is this the best the patient's going to get? What else do they need? And what restrictions do they need? Can they sit? Can they stand? Or are they forever out of a job that requires these physical demands?
And the goal of this QME experience is to be able to ultimately have the complainant return to work, or to assess the cost associated with their care, or a number of perhaps outcomes?
Yeah, good question. I would say how I view it personally is, I think from a physician perspective, we need people going back to work. Just it helps mental health. It helps being back in the community. From a taxpayer perspective, we want people back to work. Most patients I've come across want to go back to work, provide for their family, be around friends, contribute to society. The idea of the report is to solve a med-legal dispute, saying, is anyone wronged? Is anyone harmed? If so, what percentage are they impaired? Which I don't know the calculations, but it correlates to either a supplemental payout or something like that, or they rehab the person to get a new job there.
And once you have concluded your examination, you're creating a report. Are you sharing it with both attorneys, or how does the process work?
Yeah, that's what's great. There's very specific rules. That's why we have the test, but I can't talk to any of the attorneys before. I write a report and I have to answer those key questions. And the good QMEs, just like clinical medicine, they sniff out the key questions. I always say, what's the gist of the case? I had when I was in med school, I had a cardiologist when I was a third year med student, old school guy. And we would round, and my first day on the service, I would go through my presentation and he'd hold up his hand and he would go, show me the money. And I thought it was weird at first, but basically what he's saying is your report can be 120 pages, but if you don't get to the gist, why is the injured worker here? What is the legal dispute? If you don't get to those key questions, it's just fluff. So show the attorneys, show the injured worker, show the state of California the money. Answer the gist of the case. Get to the core of the problem, just like we do in clinical medicine. Answer that in your report, and then you will become busier. You will be able to help settle disputes more quickly.
Whenever the lawyers are scratching off Dr. A and Dr. B, is that on the basis of prior exam notes? Is that subject to public record, or what's the basis for that decision making on their part?
Yeah, I would say it would. So let's say one side, I've heard people, they would say the patient's always lying, 0% impairment. There's no way this happened. So that person clearly is biased. The other side is, I've seen reports the patient is 3 times dead. So they require 3 times the payout, and it's like, well, that's it's probably somewhere in the middle. Or, they get him in a deposition, which is just a Zoom meeting, and it's very clear the QME doesn't know how to apply the guides, this book, the AMA guides. So, Justin, I can ask you, hey, what's profit and loss? What's EBITDA? And you'd very easily be able to converse and answer those intelligently. If I had someone else write my report and they said, Dr. Orlovich, what about the Alvarez Guzman, or why did you use lower extremity this? And if I fumbled through those answers, it's pretty clear that like someone's writing my report, or I'm just doing a terrible job finishing the report and the template and not getting the gist of the AMA guides.
So it sounds like it's a combination of looking for bias would mean that somebody gets scratched, or also an observable lack of professional competency.
Correct. And once again, it's a little bit different than clinical medicine. For example, I had a guy, he cut off the tip of his thumb. So looking at the strict impairment rating of the guides, he gets, let's say I'm making this up, 3%, which is pretty low. That's the strict impairment rating. I have to take it upon myself to say, this is why the 3% doesn't apply in this case. Because the guy is a guitar player, the guy cuts vegetables, so his thumb is really important. And then it's upon me to invoke previous cases to say, here's another way to rate him that fully encapsulates and reflects his impairments upon daily living. So that's a little bit more creative there, but if you can walk down that pathway, it shows you're thoughtful, it shows you're taking into account why we're all there.
So then it's up to your discretion to sort of say, here's what I think the impact is for this person's job. And you're essentially assigning a value to the injury. Is that accurate?
Correct. And it's your job to explain the medical side of things. For example, I had a patient, a lot of listeners out there, tib-fib fracture, surgery, take a follow-up x-ray. They say it's healed. And then wait a minute, he can't go back to work. But they're saying it's healed. Look at the x-ray. Oh, come on, it's an x-ray. It's healed. CT, it's healed. They fail to realize the patient has developed complex regional pain syndrome. So now it's my job to sit down and say, while I acknowledge the fracture is now healed, the patient has developed this complex regional pain syndrome, which is a type of nerve injury. And here's X, Y, and Z. And a lot of people forget to explain the X, Y, and Z because he meets Budapest criteria, because the exam findings today. Here's what I would recommend for him. Job not only to assign that rating, but to also kind of teach the non-medical people, here's what's going on in that case.
Let's talk about the fee schedule. How does that work for your services?
What I love, a lot of people, when I explain the med legal part, they're like, oh my goodness, I'm not an author of 5 books. I'm not, 27 years experience. I'm going to get lowballed. This is all codified. So you can go online right now. For a new exam, it's around $2,100. For the depositions, I want to say it's like $450 an hour. For a missed appointment, I want to say it's like $600. There are modifiers. If you get an interpreter, it's 10% higher. Standard management companies take 40%, and the QME gets 60%.
Is it typical that a physician would work with a management company?
The majority of people, yes. And that's, people listen to you might be more inclined to kind of set up the scheduling. But I found it's pretty tough to contact the injured worker, set them up for a schedule, bill appropriately, rent out a room that's not in your facility. So I feel most QME companies do provide value to the physician.
And so are those rates specialty specific, or is that just for any doctor doing a QME, those are the numbers?
Across the board. That's what I love about it.
Got it.
It could be your first QME, it could be your 100th QME, you could be whatever specialty. That's what you're getting, which is great.
And how long does it typically take?
I've been told to get paid, I assume.
I was thinking in terms of like the interacting with the patient and then writing up the report and then passing it along to the attorney.
So let me tell you a quick story. So I got a case, the QME payment, the fee schedule changed. And this is where I think people who finish residency, young attendings, might kind of their ears might perk up here. Taking a step back, when I wrote my book, and I'm not plugging it here, when I wrote my book, I found out that the pace of medicine has accelerated. So the average length of stay in about the 80s compared to the average length of stay in the late, 2010s, we were discharging people 3.5 times, 4 times faster.
Whoa.
But the payments were much less, you know better than I do. With the QME, bringing it back home, so there was people who basically billed by hour. So the state of California said, okay, this QME, I have no way to control my costs here. One QME might bill 2 hours, the other QME might bill 12 hours. There's no way for me to cap this, right? So they made the transition from saying you bill the QME bills per hour to now we pay you per case. And I might add, it's $3 per page over 200 pages. So I'll get back to that in a second. So the people who, not knocking them, think of the people who type with one finger, right? Who read through every single detailed thing, who's used to working at that pace where it's not too accelerated. Justin, no joke, have seen cases where the old school bill, the guy, and your listeners are going to laugh at this, took 23 hours to see if the patient had complex regional pain syndrome. 23 hours. Now, any listener out there, can pick up on complex regional pain syndrome sooner than 23 hours. So what I'm trying to say is it rewards us who went through residency, went through fellowship, just familiar, facile with the digital age here, who can hit Control F and look for an MRI, who can go ahead and get to the show me the money questions more quickly, right? Because they recognize patterns. Because we're used to getting transfer summaries that are hundreds and thousands of pages. So that's where kind of people who aren't so quick with technology kind of don't like it as much. The people who are a little bit quicker, they can easily see a patient. Getting back to your question, if the records are in, if the historian did a good job, if the patient filled out their packet, you can get to the key questions pretty quickly. Most people, you need to be in the room at least about 20 minutes for the state of California. I would say between 30 and 60 minutes, especially if you have your note prepared and templated like we do in clinic there, because you're looking for the key questions. And remember, we're in a sandbox. So everything else, it's not like clinical medicine. Everything else may not apply. So just go to the key questions and then, use your dot phrases, use your templates to kind of express yourself more quickly instead of dictating your whole note. I found that to be a much easier way.
For the physicians that are doing a robust volume of these types of cases, is it typical? Could you do like a couple or 3 or multiple in a day? Or what do the physicians who are doing a lot of this kind of work, what does their calendar look like?
Yeah. So I would say if we're talking pain management, you can get through, I'd say 10 to 15 in a day.
Okay.
Because you think about clinical medicine, there are people out there seeing, 25, 35, 45, 55 patients a day.
Right.
This, you have the luxury of getting those records before. You have the luxury of the historian kind of prepping things. You have the luxury of spotting patterns as well. So 10 to 15 in a day if you're really humming along and you're still doing high quality work because you have multiple processes occurring at once. So it might only, quote, take you, the QME, an hour, but remember the historian spent an hour before, the review of records when you're at home watching your football game, you're getting through those. Maybe the editor is shoring things up when you're with the next patient. So everyone's working, simultaneously.
How does this compare to expert witness work?
Yeah, good question. So just to be clear, this is not expert witness work. Expert witness work, you might have one fee, Justin. I have a different fee. Expert witness work, the person can talk to the attorney. QME, you can't talk to the attorney. The expert witness work, there might be a deposit, a retainer. With this, there's no deposit, there's no retainer. Expert witness work, the questions might be varied. Hey, these are the 15 questions we're looking for in the case. With this, there are your standard questions we talked about, and then there's kind of patterns for each specialty. Pain has their flavor. Urology has their flavor. And that's where I said, even listeners who aren't pain, chances are your spouse, your close friends might be in California in other red hot specialties that are in high demand that could, get involved with this as well.
Is there any sort of interspecialty cooperation required for more complex patients in this process?
Yeah, that's what's great. And that's where, you can easily say, hey, this is outside my league, send to psychiatry. Hey, send to orthopedic surgery. Hey, send to internal medicine there. The good QME companies, and the more that a QME does these, I say you're able to spot the red flags quickly. And if you're able to spot these quicker, then you can ask for more help. Then you can ask for a detailed response from the attorneys. You can ask for a reevaluation. You can ask for them to send you a supplemental request. So you don't have to finish this all in 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You still have the luxury of asking for additional information.
Can you talk about the role of the QME company and kind of where they sit in the ecosystem here?
Yeah, so there are some good companies and some bad companies. It's really, what are they doing for the QME? Let me tell you a quick story. I had a colleague who, he asked me, he's like, hey Dan, which company should I go with? And I said, sure, like, don't tell me the names, just kind of tell me what the percentage is that they would give you in the support. And he had 3 offers. And the first one, he's like, this one's 50-50, so I'm not going to go with them. And I said, stop right there. What are they providing for that 50%? I personally have taken deals where I was paid a higher percentage, but the editor didn't get my report in on time. So that's a ding against me. The historian didn't do a good job kind of teeing up the case. The records didn't get reviewed in a timely manner. The patients didn't get text message alerts and emails reminding of them their appointment. So even though I was getting a higher percentage, I wasn't turning in higher quality reports, and therefore I wasn't in higher demand. I recommended to my friend there, I said, out of those 3 offers, take the 50-50 offer, because even though it's lower, you're going to turn in a higher quality report faster, and you get more support along the way. And that's what you want. None of us go into residency or fellowship saying, what's the pay scale here? It's, hey, am I going to get mentored? Hey, am I going to get better? Just like you said, pain management, the field is changing every year. Hey, am I going to be up to date on the QME changes, right? Things like that. Can you be the best doctor in the clinical space? Can you be the best QME in this space? I would highly recommend, don't just look at the percentage split. If you're getting 99% proceeds to you, but you have to spend 5 hours on a case, it's not worth your time. Whereas if you're getting a 50-50 split and you can get a high quality report in an hour, then it's probably worth your time to focus on the hourly rate and the quality of your report instead of just the percentage fee.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like, once you kind of get into it and you get to know the companies out there, you get to understand their cost structure and their competencies. Do you find that there's a couple that are like go-tos and a couple that are like, don't touch that with a 39.5-foot pole?
You think so? You'd think so, but just like financial management, like, oh my gosh, you're charging me a what percentage fee? Or you're charging me a what, per month? And it's like, yeah, but I'm actually saving you money long term, right? And like some of your clients will get that, some won't. There are some default companies that are, huge and people are very safe. Other companies are more boutique, right? Mm-hmm. Some companies, their whole thing, they will, here's a dirty story. They will stack the deck, right? So I remember, I told you can list 10 offices. I have been put in locations and other people have been put in locations. Is it the best for the QME? No. But that company will go to these events and say, look, we have a patient in the middle of the desert. Well, that makes them look good because then they print out a brochure to say, look, we're in the middle of the desert. But that QME now is listing that clinic, can't help anyone out, is not getting any panels, or they might get someone and then they cancel. For you, Justin, if let's say the market tanks, I can call you right away, right? And you're going to pick up. You're going to text me. I value that Some companies, I remember one, it was on a Saturday morning, and I was like, hey, I'm having trouble interpreting this case. And they said, well, we work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I thought, okay, thank you. But, as a physician, like I'm in clinic, I'm in the OR 9 to 5.
Right.
Other ones will say, hey, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you on
Hmm.
Saturday. I'm happy to review this case with you to help you out. I'm happy to give you the books, the material for you to review. Other ones that will say you'll have to buy that book. So it's really a kind of a match. There are some key questions QMEs can ask to kind of figure out, like, some people are okay with the big brand ones, others want a more boutique process and someone to pick up on a Saturday.
How long does it take to get paid?
Um, I've found like 6 to 8 weeks, I would say. And what's great, it's all codified again. So they have to pay you. Like, no one is weaseling out of anything. They have to pay you. So 6 to 8 weeks, that'll hit your bank account. I don't want to say guaranteed unless there's a hiccup and then things go on, but the majority of the time you will be getting paid.
Are there any catches or downsides or any reason that like everyone isn't doing this?
None. End of episode. Yeah, no, there are. It's not for everyone. I trained with someone. He would take offense when anyone would ask him to kind of explain his rationale, and he was just like, "Do you know who I am? Do you know how my degrees and where I'm from?" That person wouldn't do well. So QME is not for everyone. Someone has to be able to clearly articulate their thoughts, right? If the example I use is who just won the Super Bowl, the Eagles. I can't just write in my report, the Eagles are the best team. That's going to open myself up to a deposition. It's not clear. A good report will say the Eagles are the best team because, one, they have the third best defense. Two, they have the best offense in the league. Three, their I don't know, special teams is above average, whatever. If your report says this is my conclusion because of X, Y, and Z, you are like light years ahead of everyone else. The catch, Justin, is like you have to learn the AMA guides. So it takes some time to learn the rules of the sandbox. It takes some time to get busy, the 8 to 12 months. You might have to go to clinics that aren't your regular clinics. You might have to travel a little bit. You might have to maybe block off a day to set up appointments and then they cancel. So, then you blocked out your Saturday or a clinic day and there's not a lot there. Some people aren't familiar with ambiguity. They're not, comfortable being uncomfortable. Some people want to get to the exact science. In QME work, if there's an inconsistency, it's not my job as a physician to say, hey, this person is lying. All I have to do is say, I've noted an inconsistency. The patient said that they could not walk. However, the sub rosa video showed me them doing 4 backflips and running down the street. That's all I have to, as a physician, point out. So some people feel dirty. They feel like they're a hired gun, or they misinterpret it. They feel like, hey, I'm doing expert witness work, or hey, I'm doing work comp. It's not work comp. It's not expert witness work. It takes some investment to pass the test. It takes some investment to learn how to write the report. You can't just write a soap note like you do in clinic.
Are there any other particular patient encounters you can recall where you had to sort of do some complex synthesizing of the emotions of the patient, trying to determine, I don't know if you're like assessing trustworthiness and veracity of the things that you're hearing from them, and like, did they get hurt on the job? Were they playing basketball on the weekend? That kind of stuff.
Yep. Exactly. That's exactly it. So that's the rule of the playground. You call it veracity. In the report, it would be in the lingo of the sandbox, credibility. Here's why I find the patient credible. They had an injury on the first. They sought care on the first. They complained of a lot of pain, and they went to the doctor right away. They kept their physical therapy appointments. They endorsed some previous accidents, right? Here are things that kind of say they may not be credible. We need to look into it more. To your other question, when someone gets hurt, there's a part of their report that says how much is from that injury, right? So I had a guy get injured on the job, hip injury. right? And I said, hey, this is the best you're going to get. So I rated him, gave him a percentage, but then it comes down to the quote creative part. And then I say, how much is from the injury and how much did he have from maybe playing 4 years of college football? Or how much did he have from a previous job? Right? And that's where having a good rapport with the patient, getting kind of being Columbo here. My folks had always watched that, or Monk, or whatever. I don't know what the hot show is. I'm dating myself here, but getting that detective work. When else did you hurt your knee? How did it happen? Show me, recreate it. What were you doing exactly? Did you ever get hurt before? Did you ever get a surgery or an injection in that area? So that's why it's different than clinical medicine, and that's why it takes some time to learn. But I think that sleuthing, that investigative work completes or paints a more complete picture, gets you a higher quality report in the end.
For our listeners who want to take the next step and explore this further, what should they do?
Yeah, I would say there are a list of QME companies. Reach out to them. Go to the DWC website. This is probably the best. Go to the DWC website. Type in your zip code, type in your specialty. You will see a list of people who are already doing it. Chances are you work with them, they're down the street, you trained with them, you know somebody who knows somebody. Reach out to them, see what their experience is. Your listeners are welcome to call me before clinic, after clinic. I'm happy to share my thoughts as well. I think it's a really great thing. If I may, Justin, what's crazy about this, in what blew my mind, is these laws were created 100 years ago. No joke, right? So the thing is, a lot of the changes in clinical medicine that kind of a lot of physicians don't like, they are to our advantage in the QME space. For example, in the old days, somebody worked for GM for 40 years and they got a watch, and that was it. Nowadays, people have 8 different jobs. So now the current employer will say, it didn't happen on my time, it was the other employer, right? So that will get a QME. In the old days, people used to get treatment in work comp and things were approved in a timely manner. Now, certain clinics that run a lot of work comp, it's hard to be seen in a timely fashion. You may not be getting, top tier care. So that will get a QME involved. Before, it was catastrophic coverage, $10,000 back in 1918. That's a lot. And the laws, that don't quote me on the dates, but you get the gist of this. Now, $10,000, that's a Band-Aid in the ED. So that flags a QME. The copy and paste that we do with the EMRs from the ACA and everything like that. Now that's to a QME's advantage financially, because they might get 600 pages and 400 of those pages is just copy paste, copy forward. But you're charging $3 per page over 200 there. So there's a lot of changes in medicine that work in favor of a QME. And that's where with clinical medicine, it might grate a lot of us, wear us down. But in QME, it's actually to our advantage.
That's a great insight. So for our listeners, apmsuccess.com/256. This is episode 256. I will assemble some resources from Dr. Orlovich. We'll drop them there. We'll put whatever contact info he wants to share with the interwebs, and we'll post that there as well. Dr. Orlovich, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise today on the APM Success Podcast.
You got it. Thanks for your time, Justin. Appreciate it.
If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.